The delicate china clinked against polished silver as Anne Matthews adjusted her posture in the mahogany dining chair that had always felt too rigid for comfort. At 34, she still sat at these Sunday dinners like a schoolgirl awaiting judgment, her slender fingers nervously straightening the cloth napkin across her lap. Through the leaded glass windows of her parents' Greenwich mansion, the late afternoon sun cast golden rectangles across the oriental rug, highlighting dust motes that dared to exist in Eleanor Matthews' immaculate home. "Mom, can I have some more water, please?" 8-year-old Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Anne could reach for the crystal pitcher, Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand shot up in protest. "Lily, dear, we don't reach across the table. You haven't touched what's already in your glass. And please, speak up when addressing adults." Anne watched her daughter shrink into herself, those bright eyes dimming just a fraction, a sight she had witnessed too many times over the years. Beside Lily, 6-year-old Jason sat with military posture, having learned early that movement at Grandma's table invited criticism. "Diane, darling, tell everyone about your fundraiser," Richard Matthews boomed from the head of the table, beaming at his elder daughter with undisguised pride. Diane tossed her perfectly highlighted hair and launched into a detailed account of her latest charity event, her voice projecting with the confidence of someone who had never been hushed at this table. Her children, Madison and Ethan, sprawled in their chairs with the casual entitlement of those who know they can do no wrong. "We raised over $50,000, Diane concluded with a self-satisfied smile. "The committee has asked me to chair next year's gala." "Marvelous!" Eleanor exclaimed, reaching over to pat Diane's hand. "You've always had such leadership qualities." Anne took a small sip of water, remembering last month when she'd mentioned organizing her school's fundraiser that had provided new books for underprivileged students. Her mother had merely nodded before changing the subject. "Anne, you're looking rather tired," Eleanor observed, her critical gaze sweeping over her younger daughter. "Those dark circles under your eyes. Have you considered that concealer I recommended?" "I've been busy with parent-teacher conferences this week," Anne replied, fighting to keep the defensiveness from her voice. "End of the quarter always means late nights." Richard sighed, cutting into his roast beef. "All those degrees from excellent universities, and you still insist on that teaching job. Such a waste of potential." "I love teaching, Dad," Anne said quietly. "My students—" "Madison got the lead in the school play," Diane interrupted, reaching for her wine glass. "The director said she's the most talented student they've had in years." Eleanor immediately brightened. "We must all attend opening night. Richard, clear your calendar." Anne glanced at Lily, who had won her school's poetry contest last month. The performance had been attended by Anne alone, her parents having declined the invitation due to a dinner party they simply couldn't miss. As the housekeeper cleared the dinner plates, Eleanor reached for her phone. "I'm ordering takeout for dessert. That new patisserie downtown has the most divine chocolate mousse. Can we get the strawberry tart too?" Madison asked, barely looking up from her phone. "Of course, sweetheart. Anything you want." Eleanor smiled indulgently. "What about ice cream?" Jason ventured hopefully. Eleanor's smile tightened. "Anne, you really should monitor their sugar intake. Jason's getting a bit pudgy around the middle, don't you think?" Anne felt heat rise to her cheeks as she looked at her perfectly normal 6-year-old son. "He's fine, Mom." "If you say so," Eleanor replied with a dismissive wave. "Let's see. We'll get the chocolate mousse collection, the strawberry tarts Madison likes, and the truffle macaron assortment for Ethan." She continued scrolling through her phone. "And for dinner next Sunday, I'm thinking we should order from that new Japanese place. The one with the $200 omakase and the truffle pasta that Diane's children enjoy so much." "What about Lily and Jason?" Anne asked, already knowing the answer would sting. Eleanor barely looked up. "Oh, they can just eat scraps from the kitchen. They hardly appreciate fine cuisine anyway." The dining room fell silent. Anne saw Lily's bottom lip quiver while Jason stared down at his empty plate. Madison snickered behind her hand, and Ethan smirked openly. Something inside Anne, something that had bent and bent for 34 years, finally broke. "That's enough." Anne's voice cut through the room with unexpected authority, causing Eleanor to look up from her phone in surprise. I beg your pardon? Eleanor's perfectly plucked eyebrows arched high. I said that's enough, Mother. Anne stood slowly, placing her napkin beside her plate with deliberate calm that belied the storm raging within her. My children will not be eating scraps from the kitchen while their cousins enjoy $200 meals. Not today. Not ever again. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Anne, your mother didn't mean... She meant exactly what she said, Dad. She always does. Anne looked directly at her mother. Lily and Jason are just as worthy of respect and consideration as Madison and Ethan. The fact that I need to say this aloud is absurd. Diane let out an exaggerated sigh. Here we go with the dramatics. This is why we can't have nice family dinners. Nice? You call this nice? Anne gestured around the table. These Sunday dinners have become exercises in humiliation for me and my children. Every week, we sit here and endure criticism about everything from our clothes to our achievements to, apparently, my son's perfectly healthy body. You're overreacting, Eleanor said dismissively. We're just trying to help you improve. God knows you need the guidance. What I need, Mother, is respect. What my children need is grandparents who don't make them feel like second-class family members. Eleanor's face hardened. Well, if you're going to be ungrateful about our hospitality... Hospitality? Anne laughed incredulously. Is that what you call this? Constant criticism packaged as guidance? Blatant favoritism disguised as having standards? Richard banged his fist on the table. That's quite enough, Anne. Your mother and I have done everything for this family. We've provided opportunities, connections. For Diane. You've done everything for Diane, Anne corrected. I'm the afterthought. I always have been. That is simply not true, Eleanor protested, though her eyes darted nervously to Diane. Anne noticed the exchange. What am I missing here? There's something else going on, isn't there? The uncomfortable silence that followed confirmed her suspicion. Diane suddenly became intensely interested in her water glass, while her parents exchanged loaded glances. Someone had better start talking, Anne said, crossing her arms. Richard sighed heavily, removing his glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose. This isn't how we wanted to approach this matter, but since you're forcing the issue... He glanced at Diane, who gave a slight nod. Your sister is experiencing some financial difficulties. Financial difficulties? Anne repeated slowly. Diane's carefully constructed facade cracked slightly. Robert left last month, took what was left in our accounts and disappeared. Left? I saw your anniversary post on social media 2 weeks ago. Image management, Diane muttered, avoiding eye contact. The truth is, we've been living beyond our means for years. Robert's business failed 6 months ago, but we kept up appearances. The house is in foreclosure and it turns out we're bankrupt. Anne stood speechless, processing this revelation. I'm sorry about Robert, truly. But what does this have to do with me? Eleanor interjected, her voice taking on that syrupy quality that Anne recognized as her manipulation tone. Diane and the children need somewhere to stay while she sorts things out. Just temporarily. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. You want them to move in with me? Anne asked incredulously. Into my 2-bedroom apartment in Stamford. Where exactly would everyone sleep? The children could share a room, Eleanor suggested, as if this were the most reasonable solution in the world. And you have that pull-out sofa in your living room for Diane. Anne stared at her mother in disbelief. Let me get this straight. You've been particularly awful to my children today because you're buttering me up to take in my sister and her family? Into my small apartment that you've criticized as barely suitable for just the 3 of us? Don't be selfish, Anne, Richard admonished. Family helps family in times of need. And where is your help in this scenario? Anne challenged. This mansion has 6 bedrooms. Why aren't they moving in here? Eleanor and Richard exchanged another uncomfortable glance. We've decided to downsize, Richard finally admitted. The market is favorable, and quite frankly, the maintenance on this place is becoming burdensome as we age. Anne felt a surge of clarity wash over her. So you're selling the house, moving somewhere smaller and expecting me, the daughter you've consistently treated as less important, to absorb the fallout of Diane's financial crisis? When you put it that way, it sounds terrible, Diane snapped. Because it is terrible, Anne replied evenly. It's terrible and absurd and absolutely not happening. The elegant brownstone in the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side stood in stark contrast to the Matthews' ostentatious Greenwich mansion. Where her parents' home shouted wealth with marble columns and crystal chandeliers, Patricia Winter's residence whispered it through understated art and antiques with actual history and meaning. Anne sat in the sun-dappled sitting room, watching as her godmother poured tea into delicate cups that had belonged to her grandmother. At 72, Patricia moved with the grace of a former ballet dancer. Her silver hair swept into a simple chignon, her only jewelry a pair of pearl earrings and her late husband's watch. So, they finally showed their true colors, Patricia remarked, handing Anne a cup. Can't say I'm surprised. Eleanor always did have a gift for manipulation. I still can't believe they expected me to take them all in, Anne said, shaking her head. After years of treating me like I was somehow deficient for choosing teaching over corporate law or medicine. Patricia settled into her armchair, crossing her ankles. Your mother never understood the concept of vocation. Neither did your father. For them, success has always been measured in material acquisition and social status. I just don't understand why, Anne said, her voice catching. Why has Diane always been the golden child? What did I do wrong? Patricia's kind eyes softened. Oh, my dear girl, you did nothing wrong. Some parents simply pick favorites, often for reasons that have nothing to do with the children themselves. She took a thoughtful sip of tea. Did you know that your mother was the second daughter in her family as well? She spent her childhood watching her older sister receive preferential treatment. I sometimes wonder if she's unconsciously recreating that dynamic. Anne considered this. That doesn't excuse it. No, it certainly doesn't, Patricia agreed. Understanding is not the same as excusing, but it might help you see that this pattern existed long before you came along. You didn't cause it, and you couldn't have prevented it. Lily and Jason played quietly in Patricia's library, surrounded by books and the small collection of toys that their godmother kept specifically for their visits. Through the open door, Anne could see them engaged in a chess game that Patricia had taught them, their faces serious with concentration. They're remarkable children, Patricia observed, following Anne's gaze. Thoughtful, intelligent, kind. You've done a beautiful job raising them, especially considering the circumstances. Anne felt tears prick at her eyes. Thank you for noticing. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one who sees how special they are. I see it, Patricia assured her. I've always seen it. And I've also seen how Eleanor and Richard have treated you all these years. She set down her teacup with a decisive click against the saucer. It's time for that to change. How? Anne asked. They're not exactly open to criticism. Patricia straightened in her chair, a glint of determination in her eye. Did you know that your grandfather, my late husband's brother, set up trust funds for both you and Diane when you were born? Anne stared at her godmother. No, I had no idea. $5 million each, to be released when you turn 35, or at the trustee's discretion for special circumstances. Patricia's lips curved into a small smile. As the surviving trustee, I believe your current situation qualifies as a special circumstance. $5 million, Anne whispered, struggling to comprehend the figure. Your parents have been controlling the narrative about family finances for too long, Patricia continued. They've perpetuated this idea that you're somehow financially dependent on their goodwill. You're not, and you never have been. Does Diane know about her trust? Patricia nodded. She received hers 5 years ago, used it to buy that ridiculous house and fund their extravagant lifestyle. It's gone now, squandered on appearances. Anne sat back, processing this information. So all these years, while they've been treating me like I'm struggling financially because of my career choice, they knew you had significant resources waiting for you, Patricia finished. They just preferred to keep you in a position where they could exert control through financial manipulation. A mix of emotions washed over Anne. Anger, betrayal, but also a strange sense of liberation. What should I do? Patricia reached over to take Anne's hand. First, you establish boundaries. Clear, firm, non-negotiable boundaries. Second, you claim what's rightfully yours. And third, Her eyes twinkled with mischief. You rewrite the family dynamic on your terms. The following Sunday, Anne did not arrive at her parents' mansion with her children in tow. Instead, she sent a simple text message. We won't be attending dinner today, or any Sunday in the foreseeable future. Her phone rang almost immediately. What do you mean you're not coming? Eleanor demanded without preamble. We have important matters to discuss about Diane's situation. I've given it a lot of thought, Mother, Anne replied calmly. I won't be hosting Diane and her children in my apartment. This is exactly the kind of selfishness I was talking about, Eleanor huffed. Your sister needs help, and she should get it, from her parents, or from the $5 million trust fund she received 5 years ago. A lengthy silence followed this statement. Patricia told you, Eleanor finally said, her voice tight. Yes, she did. She also told me about my own trust fund. Interesting that you never mentioned it. We were protecting you. Richard's voice came through, indicating that she was on speakerphone. You've never been good with money, Anne. Look at your career choice. My career choice reflects my values, not my financial acumen, Anne countered. And speaking of values, I've decided that my children and I need some distance from family dynamics that undermine their self-worth. You're overreacting, Eleanor insisted. One comment about kitchen scraps. It wasn't one comment, Mother. It's been a lifetime of comments, comparisons, and clear favoritism. I won't subject Lily and Jason to that anymore. So you're cutting us off from our grandchildren? Richard's voice rose indignantly. No, I'm establishing boundaries. You're welcome to see them, but only if you can treat them with the same respect and consideration you show to Madison and Ethan. This is ridiculous, Eleanor sputtered. We love all our grandchildren equally. Your actions haven't reflected that. And until they do, we'll be taking a step back. After ending the call, Anne sat in her small living room, heart pounding but mind clear. For the first time in her adult life, she had directly confronted her parents about their behavior. The relief was palpable. The next morning, Anne visited Patricia's attorney, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who explained the details of the trust fund with refreshing clarity. The money is already yours, she explained, sliding documents across her desk. We just need to file these papers to formalize the transfer to accounts in your name. Within a week, Anne found herself in possession of financial resources she had never imagined. With Patricia's guidance, she made careful decisions, purchasing a comfortable 4-bedroom home in a neighborhood with excellent schools, setting aside college funds for Lily and Jason, and investing the remainder wisely. She also took a calculated risk, reducing her teaching hours to part-time while establishing an educational consulting business that had been a dream for years. Her expertise in childhood development and curriculum design quickly attracted clients, and within months, her business was thriving. When Eleanor and Richard finally visited the new house, having endured 3 weeks of Patricia's gentle but persistent persuasion, their shock was evident. This is quite nice, Eleanor admitted reluctantly, running her finger along the quartz countertop in Anne's spacious kitchen. Thank you, Anne replied simply, pouring coffee into mugs that were neither fine china nor cheap ceramic, but beautifully crafted stoneware made by a local artist. How exactly are you affording all this on a teacher's salary? Richard asked, eyebrows raised in suspicion. I'm not, Anne said. I'm affording it with my trust fund and my consulting business, both of which, as it happens, are doing quite well. Lily and Jason moved through their new home with a confidence Anne had never seen at her parents' house. They showed their grandparents their rooms, their books, their art projects, speaking with voices that no longer dropped to whispers in Eleanor and Richard's presence. Jason won the school chess tournament last week, Anne mentioned casually as they sat in the sun-filled dining room. Eleanor glanced at her grandson with new interest. Chess? That's a thinking person's game. Godmother Patricia taught me, Jason replied proudly. She says I have an analytical mind. Lily's poetry was published in the district literary magazine, Anne continued. Her teacher says she has remarkable talent. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. We would have come to the poetry performance if we'd understood it was important. Everything concerning my children is important, Anne stated firmly, but without anger. That's something I hope you'll remember going forward. Over the next 6 months, the The Matthews family dynamics underwent a transformation that none of them could have predicted. Diane, faced with the reality of her financial situation, moved into a modest apartment provided by her parents, who had indeed downsized to a comfortable but significantly less ostentatious home. Without the pressure to maintain appearances, she slowly began rebuilding her life on more authentic terms. "I've taken a job," she announced during a family dinner at Anne's home, the new gathering place for their now monthly family meals. "It's entry-level marketing at a small firm, but it's a start." "That's wonderful," Anne said sincerely, passing her sister the bowl of roasted vegetables. "It's beneath her capabilities," Eleanor started to say, but stopped when she caught Anne's steady gaze. "But of course, everyone has to start somewhere," she amended. Madison and Ethan, initially resentful of their reduced circumstances, gradually adjusted to a life with fewer material advantages, but more maternal presence. When Diane began volunteering at their school, something she'd never had time for during her social climbing days, they discovered a different side of their mother. "Mom helped design the sets for the spring play," Madison mentioned to Lily one afternoon as the cousins sprawled across Anne's living room floor, working on homework together. "She's actually really good at art stuff." "That's cool," Lily replied, genuinely interested. "Maybe she could help with the mural project at our school too." The relationship between the cousins slowly evolved from rivalry to something resembling friendship, nurtured by Anne's insistence on regular family gatherings where all the children were treated equally. Even Eleanor and Richard began to change, albeit more slowly. When Richard fell ill with pneumonia in the winter, it was Anne who organized his care, balanced the hospital paperwork, and ensured Eleanor had support during his week-long hospitalization. "You've been very competent through all this," Eleanor remarked as they sat in the hospital waiting room during Richard's final day of treatment. Anne smiled slightly. "I've always been competent, Mom. You just never noticed." Eleanor had the grace to look chagrined. "Perhaps we've underestimated you in some ways." "In many ways," Anne corrected gently. "But that's in the past. What matters now is moving forward as a healthier family." When spring arrived, Anne hosted an Easter celebration in her backyard. Patricia attended as the guest of honor, watching with satisfaction as 3 generations of Matthews engaged in an egg hunt across the flowering garden. "You've done something remarkable here," she told Anne as they sat under the shade of a blooming cherry tree. "You've broken a generational pattern of favoritism and emotional manipulation." Anne watched as Eleanor helped Jason fill his basket, pointing out an egg hidden beneath a clump of daffodils with more patience than she'd ever shown him before. "I couldn't have done it without your support," Anne said, squeezing her godmother's hand, "financial and otherwise." "The money was just a tool," Patricia replied wisely. "The real change came from your courage to stand up for yourself and your children." Across the lawn, Diane approached, looking more relaxed in jeans and a simple sweater than Anne had ever seen her in designer outfits. "Your yard is gorgeous," Diane said, sitting beside them. "I've been thinking about taking a gardening class. My apartment has a small patio that gets good sun. I could recommend some starter plants," Anne offered. "Lily and I have been learning together," Diane nodded, watching her children play with their cousins. "I owe you an apology, Anne. For a lot of things, over a lot of years." Anne felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "We're finding a new way forward. That's what matters now." On a balmy evening in late summer, Anne stood in her kitchen preparing dinner while Lily and Jason set the table for their weekly Friday pizza night. The doorbell rang, and Jason raced to answer it. "Grandma and Grandpa are here," he called out. "And they brought ice cream." Anne smiled to herself, remembering a time not so long ago when her parents would have considered an evening of homemade pizza and board games beneath them. Now, these Friday gatherings had become something all of them looked forward to. Eleanor entered the kitchen carrying a bag from the local creamery. "I got that butter pecan you like," she told Anne, placing it in the freezer. "And chocolate chip for the children." "Thanks, Mom. That's thoughtful of you." Richard settled at the kitchen island, watching Anne roll out pizza dough with practiced ease. "Your educational consulting proposal for the Westport district was approved," he mentioned. "I heard it from Jim Lawson at the golf club yesterday. He said the board was impressed." Anne nodded, pleased but not surprised. "We're implementing the new literacy program this fall. It should help close the achievement gap they've been struggling with." "You've built something significant," Richard acknowledged, a note of respect in his voice that would have been unimaginable a year ago. "Both professionally and here, with your family." "I've always been building something significant, Dad," Anne replied, sprinkling cheese across the tomato sauce. "It just wasn't something you recognized as valuable until recently." To her surprise, Richard nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. I had a rather narrow definition of success." The evening unfolded with comfortable familiarity. Pizza eaten around the dining table, ice cream served in mismatched bowls, and a spirited game of Scrabble that had them all laughing. When Madison and Ethan called from their weekend at summer camp, they were put on speakerphone so everyone could hear their adventures. Later, as Eleanor helped clear the dishes, a task she would have once left to household staff, she paused beside Anne at the sink. "Patricia was right all those months ago," she said quietly. "We did play favorites, and it wasn't fair to you. I think—" She hesitated, unused to such candor. "I think I was recreating what I knew from my own childhood. It wasn't conscious, but that doesn't make it any less harmful." Anne turned to face her mother, seeing for perhaps the first time the insecurities that lay beneath that polished exterior. "Thank you for acknowledging that. You're a remarkable mother, Anne. Better than I was. Your children are secure in your love in a way that—" Eleanor trailed off, her eyes growing distant. "In a way that Diane and I weren't?" Anne finished gently. Eleanor nodded, blinking rapidly. "I'm trying to do better. It's not easy to change at my age." "But you are changing," Anne assured her. "We all are." From the living room came the sound of Richard's deep laugh as Jason apparently said something amusing. The simple sound of her father genuinely enjoying her son's company filled Anne with quiet satisfaction. After her parents and Diane's family had departed, Anne tucked her children into bed, savoring these moments that she knew would pass too quickly as they grew. "Mom?" Lily asked sleepily as Anne smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart? I like our family better now. Everyone seems happier." Anne smiled in the dim light of the bedside lamp. "I think we are happier. We're learning to see and appreciate each other for who we really are." Later, standing on her back porch under a canopy of stars, Anne reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. From that breaking point at her parents' dining table to this moment of hard-won peace, she had traversed an emotional landscape that had transformed not just her life, but the lives of everyone in her family. The path hadn't been without its challenges. There had been resistance, setbacks, old patterns reasserting themselves. But with each boundary maintained, each authentic conversation shared, the family had incrementally shifted toward healthier dynamics. Anne no longer sat at family gatherings waiting for judgment or criticism. She no longer watched her children dim their light in their grandparents' presence. Instead, she had created a new reality, one where respect flowed in all directions, where achievements were celebrated regardless of who accomplished them, and where love wasn't conditional upon meeting arbitrary standards. In standing up for herself and her children, Anne had ultimately given her entire family a precious gift, the chance to know and love each other authentically, beyond the distorting lens of favoritism and materialism. Patricia had been right. The money itself wasn't the point. It had simply been the tool that allowed Anne to break free from patterns of control and dependency. The real wealth lay in the relationships now being rebuilt on foundations of genuine respect and care. As she turned to go inside, Anne felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey wasn't over. Family healing rarely followed a neat, linear path, but they were moving in the right direction. And for the first time in her life, Anne knew without doubt that she was seen, valued, and respected for exactly who she was. If you enjoyed this story of family transformation and emotional growth, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives. Hit that like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences with family dynamics. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful stories to life. Thanks for listening.